Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we'll be taking a look at the Forbidden Lands Game Master's Guide and related Game Master material for the Forbidden Lands. This is the second part of my series on this box set. If you haven't seen my previous video looking at the player-focused material for Forbidden Lands, I would go check that out first, just so you know what's up here. This episode is sponsored by Into the AM and their line of fantasy, sci-fi, and horror-themed t-shirts. This one, for example, reminds me of an entity that you might encounter on the astral plane in D&D. They've sent me a wide assortment of sample t-shirts, and I've always been impressed by the comfort and print quality. Random strangers have walked up to me and complimented me on how good they look. Right now, they have a deal going on where for $60, you can get a bundle of 3 t-shirts, and then by using my link in the description below, you can get an additional 10% off. Thanks again to Into the AM for sponsoring this episode, and now let's get back to the show. All right, there's 2 pieces of material here that the box set provides. We have the whole Game Master's Guide, which is a quite thick, substantial volume, along with the Legends and Adventures pamphlet over here, which allows you to flesh out some adventures of your own. We'll take a look at that in just a second. First of all, let's look at our book here. Same build quality and design as our player's book, except this is done in green. Again, beautiful looking. It feels nice. It looks great. It has a nice heft to it. It's just a really beautiful piece of work. As usual, I'll put links down in the description below for where you can check this stuff out for yourself. We have a map on the inside of the Forbidden Lands, just like with our other book. We start off with a little essay on what is the Game Master. What is your job? What is your role to play here? I love how it begins with the principles of the game. This is something that's becoming more common, especially in OSR games. And there was a lot of OSR influence on this system, which is something that they do talk about, especially in some of the adventure compendiums. I worked on one of the adventures in one of the adventure compendiums, which I'll probably look at that a little bit later. But they did go out of their way to hire a bunch of OSR people to work on some of the adventures. So that really shows how much they were focusing on those principles when they were thinking about the Forbidden Lands. So we see some of the stuff here like the world lies before you, the land is full of legends. This is really going to be about the players heading out into the wild and making decisions on their own, and the Game Master being a little bit more reactive. The GM is not really creating a series of events or encounters that they're going to go through one at a time. The players are leading the way. They're making their own fate, as the principle says right here. Nothing is for free, and them that's got shall lose. So everything that you get, you can lose. If you get powerful artifacts or spells, awesome. But that means that people are going to be coming for you. The world is going to react. Nothing is for certain. And death is part of the story. It is expected that your character will probably die at some point. It's as not a super lethal game, as I mentioned in my previous video on the topic. It does make it pretty easy to be taken out of combat, but actually dying is a little bit more difficult. But it doesn't protect you as much as other games. And if you're getting into combat a lot, your character's probably going to die eventually. And the end is never set. They do have a collection called the Raven's Purge, which is a whole bunch of new adventure locations that you can drop into the Forbidden Lands hex crawl. But you have to get that separately. So a little bit of advice here on the first session and preparing sessions and how to deal with failure. It does advise you to use failure to introduce new complications so that you can keep things moving and prevent players from just freezing in their tracks and not knowing what to do next. We have events at the stronghold right at the beginning, which is an interesting place to put it. So these are just things that can happen once you build your castle. So anything from thieves in the night to riders showing up or monster attacks, peddlers, minstrels, things that can just mess things up or make things a little bit more interesting once you decide to build a castle. I do wish there was even more options. It says it's D66 table, but really there's only 36 options because you're rolling 2D6 in order to generate this. And I think something more like a D100 table would have been better just because 36 options is not a whole lot. You're going to have to start making up your own pretty soon, especially if you're running a longer campaign. We have a section here on the history of the world. So this has a brief rundown right here. and then it gets into the really detailed history if you want that. So whether you want to use this history is really up to you. The basic gist of it is that the land here was once mostly controlled by elves and dwarves. Humans arrived, got into conflicts with them, eventually left them on their own and settled in a different place, but then of course invaded, and there's been problems ever since. Eventually a wizard or a necromancer takes over the realm and imposes the blood mist, which is this curse upon the land that prevents anyone from going out at night. And the whole Forbidden Lands becomes forbidden because no one can enter it without being consumed by the blood mist. And everyone who has a town is forced to stay in that town and they can't go out at night. So the country goes into a kind of stagnation for hundreds of years. After eventually the blood mist lifts, then everything opens up again, and that's where our campaign starts. But there's a lot of detail here for all of the years prior to that. I looked through it. It wasn't really that interesting to me. So I probably wouldn't use it, personally speaking. Detailed back history is not something that my players are often very interested in. They want to know what's happening right now. And this just didn't grab my attention all that much. But that could be different for other people. We have a calendar right here, which just shows you the different festivals that they're going to go through over the course of the year. It does surprise me a little bit that there's a unified system of festivals, especially when all of these different cultures have sprung up in the Forbidden Lands after being, locked in their local vicinities for so long. But that's there if you need to use it. I do like calendars in long form games. I think that's really cool when you're actually tracking what day it is and like what the weather's like. But there's not a lot of information about that, unfortunately. We have a system of gods. For the most part, there's really only one god, but there's all these different cultures that interpret what that god is differently. And I kind of like that. That does match what you see in the real world, where you have lots of bickering over the details, and that's what creates factions. A section on the kins of the world, so humans and elves and dwarves. It's pretty standard Tolkien-esque races. We have a map of the world here where we can see where the different factions hang out. So the different types of orcs are here and here. You have Canide dwarves and Meromanian dwarves. And you can get into all those details if you want. Most of the races are, they're about what you would expect. They usually have one or two weird twists to them. For example, elves are pretty much like Tolkien-esque elves. They live forever. They're in tune with nature. But the weird twist is that they have a ruby gem inside their chest. That's the source of their eternal life. And over time, it's going to regenerate their bodies, which is why they always seem so young. But it's just a small difference. And there's a lot of detail on them if you want to get into more information. The dwarves, their twist is that they believe they are building the whole world. So they believe the earth was really tiny at one point, and over time they have built up the stone of the world and made it larger and larger. And eventually they're going to enlarge the world enough so that they can reach the stars, which are forges that the gods have placed there. A fun little twist. Most of these don't really grab my attention. They don't really inspire me all that much. Orcs, I think the main twist is that they're secretly matriarchal, but they don't really tell anyone that. Apart from that, they're your typical savage warrior race is the gist that they're going for. You have wolfkin, saurians, which are like crocodile people. Whiners, which are these tiny little guys that for some reason everyone wants to eat because apparently they're delicious, which is a little strange, but there you go. Halflings and goblins, the idea here is that they are actually the same race. So whenever a halfling or a goblin gives birth, there's a 50-50 chance of it being a halfling or a goblin. And so the races are kind of intertwined with each other and have intentionally segregated. So every time one is born, then it just gets sent over to its proper kin. We have a bestiary here. Or bestiary. I feel like I'm always saying that wrong. All of the art is done by the same illustrator, or the vast majority of the art, I believe, which, as I mentioned before, is Nils Gulliksen. It's not really my style. I think it's really well done. It definitely has a look to it. But it doesn't, I'm not sure the right way to put it. It doesn't feel like it inspires a world in a way that other artists I've seen do. I can't predict what the aesthetics of other people or locations are going to be like from looking at these illustrations. I don't know if I'm explaining it very well, but it's really well done, but it just isn't my jam, I suppose. It's very inky and kind of spindly. There are some artists in some of the other Forbidden Lands books, especially the Spire of Quetzal, that I think are really good and have an aesthetic that is very evocative and really pulls you in. Dragons, drake worms. It's mostly your typical fantasy monsters. One thing I like is that each monster has a series of monster attacks. So rather than the monster just, I hit, you hit, back and forth over and over again, you can either pick one of these or just roll a d6 to decide what the monster does this turn. So you're going to get a lot of variety and you're going to get attacks that fit with the kind of thing that it is. So it could be a horrible roar, a sweeping blow, gnarly roots, crushing grip, an ent hug, or a rock throw. Isn't Ent owned by the Tolkien estate? I feel like it is, but maybe not if they put it in here. Let's skip through this a little bit. We got ghosts, giants, giant squids, gray bears, griffins, harpies, hydras, insectoids, manticores, minotaurs, nightwargs, sea serpents, strangling vines, trolls, wyverns. I kind of like how wyverns are pterodactyls. That's pretty funny. And we have lots of types of undead right here. When we get to artifacts, these are the more powerful items that you can find in the Forbidden Lands, things that actually have stories behind them. All of the weapon-focused ones are okay, but they're mostly just, they do more damage, or they do fire damage, or something like that. The ones that aren't weapons tend to be much more interesting, because they give you creative options for problem solving, which is what I like. So for example, these boots, they're a pair of sturdy hiking boots, each of which is fastened to the foot in calf with straps. You got an appearance section. Then you have effects. For example, the boots always give purchase no matter how slippery or steep a surface is, and it's even possible to walk upside down on the ceiling. That's great. Players can use that in unexpected ways, which is what I like. Or we have Menkara's Tooth, where the effect is the user can touch something with the tip of the container and then pull out a rope up to 50 meters long, like you're a spider. Nice. Or the user can open the container and spill out some of the living liquid, which then swells into a spider that attacks the enemies of the tooth's opener. This one's great too. So there's these two tablets that always correspond to one another. So there's these shifting patterns on the stone, and you can push the patterns around. It's going to be mirrored on the other tablet. You can't actually make words with it. You can just move the patterns around. So you and the other person have to agree on what patterns mean what. We get to a section on encounters next. So what it does is it breaks it down by terrain type, which is a great way of doing it. And then once you determine what terrain that you're in on the hex map that we've seen in my previous video on this, then you would roll your 2d6 and decide which encounter it is and then go to that number. Now, the downside here is that there's really only 43 possible encounters. And that's not to say these encounters are bad. Actually, a lot of them are quite good in the sense that they're not just combat encounters. They're just weird encounters, and players have to decide how they're going to react to what they find. What I would have liked to see is maybe in supplement to this, a system where for each terrain type, you have all the different types of creatures that could show up there, including people, monsters, animals, and then maybe also another table saying what they're doing. And then you could roll on both of those tables to generate new encounters really quickly. As it is here, if you look at one particular terrain type, like look at just plains, there's really not that many types of encounters that you're going to be running into here. You're going to run through those pretty quickly. So you can always make up your own, obviously, but it would be nice to have even more variety. For example, you can run into flagellants, which are just a bunch of weird people flagellating themselves, and they really want you to get in on the fun. You could have the balloon dwarf pilot, so a dwarf that has decided that he hates the underground, and he wants to live in the air from now on. He has a balloon, and he's crash landed, and he has a crossbow. So what do you want to do? You can avoid him, you can fight him, you can befriend him. Perhaps if you get on his good side, you can get in the balloon, and then now you have a balloon, and you can fly around the Forbidden Lands. That would be awesome. So I love how it's just strange, unusual stuff that doesn't necessarily involve combat. So good job on that. Adventure sites. So this book is going to contain 3 fleshed out adventure sites. There's 3 main types of those. We have villages and castles and dungeons. So pretty much all adventure sites fall into one of those categories. There's only 3 here. The Forbidden Lands has a huge number of hexes, so you're going to have to be making up a lot of your own adventure sites. And this does give you tools to do that. I would have liked to see more fully fleshed out ones, though. I suppose you have to buy the Raven's Purge book if you want to get a whole bunch more pre-made ones. So, for example, creating a village. Lots of random tables here for generating your own villages. When it was built, who was the ruler of it? It could be, for example, a brutal mayor or a bickering council. Every village has a problem. What's its claim to fame? What's its oddity? What's its institutions? What is the inn like there? So this is similar to some of the generators that I made when I was making maze rats. So it's nice to see that. It even has a 2d6 system for rolling up the results, which is a lot like maze rats. Going on to dungeons. What is the original purpose of the dungeon? Who created it? What is the history of the dungeon? You got to have that because dungeons should have layers of time built onto them, and that's a good way of doing that. Who's living there? What's the entrance like? What are some rooms like? I feel like these could be fleshed out even more given the amount of space that's here, but it's decent generators. And a section on castles. Their inhabitants, their names, oddities. And we have a system for generating your own NPCs here. The personal quirks, occupations, characteristics, and some treasure and finds generators, because you're going to need to be able to find stuff when you loot the bodies or you search the treasure chests. We begin with our first fleshed out adventure location, which is a village called the Hollows. The gist here is that you have a town that has been built on a burial ground. So at night, the dead rise from their graves in ghost form and just wander around the village. Everyone there is perfectly used to this, but it's pretty weird if you are a stranger. Random encounters for strange events happening in the Hollows. We have a really nice map here. I think the map work is done really well throughout all of these books. The only downside is oftentimes the crease of the book runs right through the map. So it's a little hard to see what's going on sometimes right in the center. Like the 13 on that house is right down there in the center, and it's a bit hard to find. Each of the locations gets a little write-up. The way that adventure locations are structured is, I guess, not optimal. They all have a little bit of box text right here that is for the players, and then you have a section for the DM. It's a little bit verbose. I don't know if you really need all of that. I think this could have been tightened up so that it was just bullet points and, bolded words so that you can communicate the information faster instead of having to read whole paragraphs and then interpreting that into actionable content for the players. But it's really not as verbose as it could be. I've seen stuff that's much worse. We have write-ups of all the places first, and then we have all the characters at the end. I think it may have been better to do it the other way around, because as it is, you're going through all these locations and it's talking about characters, but you often don't have a really great sense of what those people are like or how they're connected to each other until you get to the very end of the write-up. It would have been better, I think, to know about the people first and then see where they live and what their surroundings are like. So here's all the different characters at the back. Stat blocks are really simple throughout all of the Forbidden Lands, right? You just have their basic abilities here, or their attributes, as they're called here: strength, agility, wits, and empathy, their skills, and their gear. That's really all you need to run them. I like that. So there's not a lot of prep involved. We have events that you can plop into the village to make things a little bit more engaging. A lot of the characters have relationships and tensions with each other. So once the players stumble in, they're going to find themselves in a situation that they can resolve or perhaps turn to their advantage in some way. We have a castle location, Weatherstone. Same deal here. Each of them has a legend at the very beginning, and then you get right into the locations. Again, great map. I really like it. It's not really clear how all the parts are connected, though. So it's a really nice image. Again, that crease kind of makes it hard to read the middle of the map there. And you can see from the outside basically how stuff is connected, but you're not seeing layouts of the rooms or anything like that. So you're going to have to perhaps hand wave that a bit. There's a rival adventuring party here that wants things that you want. There's an undead ruler in the castle, and if you mess around with him, he's going to raise all of the dead to come after you. So a lot of things to watch out for. And of course, plenty of treasure to loot. The Vale of the Dead. So this one is a dungeon, or that's what it's called. It's really only partially a dungeon. So you would go down here, down this cliff, and then explore this little cave network right here. This would be the real dungeon. And then you get to the Vale of the Dead over here. So it's really more of an outdoor location, I would say, overall. We have different ghosts that you can find there. And all the characters are at the back as usual. At the very end of the book, we have a series of, these are the legends. So the different artifacts that you find and the adventure locations have a legend, a section in italics that gives you background information. This could be something that players find in a book or a scroll as they're scrounging around. It could be something that another NPC tells them that incites them to go off and find this item or find this location. So I think you could photocopy these pages and perhaps cut them out and just give them to the players once they discover them. That would be nice as a kind of clue as to interesting things for them to go after. Some of them are short, some of them are long. All right, so we have one for each of the locations at the end, the Hollows, Weatherstone, and Vale of the Dead. All right, so that is our Game Master material for Forbidden Lands in this book. The only other piece of material is this little pamphlet right here, which we're going to look at. And this provides some extra information about generating your own material when you're running a campaign. Starting off with backstories. So anytime you're creating an NPC, you can look at their childhood, right? And this is broken down by the different kins and sub-kins, right? Because some of these different kins, like humans, could be from different countries, which gives them different backgrounds. Once you get through their childhoods, you can figure out what was their formative events, and that's going to be based on their professions. So it gives you a lot of variety here in terms of developing that. It also comes with skill and talent packages. How do you meet each other? Of course, you can use this for PCs as well as NPCs. And a legend generator. So we looked at some of those legends in the Game Master's Guide. If you want to create your own, this is sort of like a prompt for creating your own adventure. It doesn't make the whole thing, but it gives you a starting point. And it creates basically a sentence. So for example, a long time ago, during the Elder Wars, there was a jealous treasure hunter who sought an artifact because of a promise and traveled to a grave located far away. In a forest in the direction of north, as a legend goes, it is said that he died in battle and that at the location there is a large treasure, but also insane goblins. So by putting that together, you have the basic structure that you can then flesh out if you want to create your own adventure location for players to interact with. A monster generator as well. We do have like the monsters in the bestiary over there, but sometimes you want to create your own custom weird stuff. And this does allow you to combine different heads with different methods of movement. And you can get all sorts of weird stuff, like maybe it has tentacles, but it likes to dig in the ground. Its traits might be camouflaged, maybe it blends in with the earth. Its weakness is its sensitive eyes, though, which makes sense because it's burrowing in the ground. And its motivation is hunger. Give it some attacks, give it some special attacks, and give it some extra weird attack abilities. So could be a slashing attack or a fire attack or an acid attack. And then you have a monster that you can use. I'm not totally sure why this is in a separate pamphlet. This seems like perfectly good material that you could include in the original Game Master's Guide. But it is here. It's in the box set, so you can use it. So that's it for all of our Game Master's material. It does give you quite a lot. So running a large hex crawl campaign, a sandbox like that, is a lot of work because you can't just plan out exactly what's going to happen next session. The players can just go off to the left or go off to the right. But this does give you a lot of tools to generate that stuff ahead of time. What you could do, for example, is use the materials in here to generate a bunch of adventure locations at the start of a campaign. So then when players wander off, you can simply plop them down as they go. That would make things pretty easy. The only main criticism is that I would have liked to see some of the random tables to be more fleshed out, and I would have liked to see some more adventure locations without having to buy a whole separate book to get a compendium of those. But that's the way it is. All right, thanks for watching this review. As usual, I will put links down in the description below where you can check this out for yourself if you'd like to buy a copy of it. And thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.